Oh, hello, and welcome. So in this video, I just want to have a look at some of the large cap tech stocks: Apple, Microsoft, Tesla, and Nvidia. So let's start with Apple. Apple was down sharply on Friday, down almost 5% after reporting earnings. Now, Apple has been on a very strong uptrend along its 20-day exponential moving average, the blue line. So you can see that earlier this week it had fallen below that 20 EMA, and then on Friday after the earnings release, it fell below the daily 50 EMA. So it is now below both the daily 20 and 50 EMA. So that's negative. If I look at the momentum indicators, you'll see that RSI has fallen below the 50 level, so this is not good, and MACD is beginning to move lower. Now, if you look at, if I look at the RSI, you can see that RSI had moved above the 50 level right here, sometimes in January, and for the most part, it stayed above the 50 level throughout until now. And during this time, you can see positive price action. So this is definitely negative at the moment. So looking on a daily chart, both the price action and momentum indicators are weak. Now I want to see the weekly chart just to see what can we learn. So on a weekly basis, you can see that since forming this low, Apple had formed a weekly higher low right here, but since then it has just gone straight up. So it's entirely possible that this pullback is in search of another weekly higher low. Maybe it does something like this, forms a base and does that. So this would then be a weekly higher low. So this is entirely possible. Why? Because if you look to the left, and you'll see that when the stock was recovering after the COVID sell-off, it would pull back, rally, pull back, rally, pull back, rally, and it was forming a series of weekly higher lows as it moved higher. But it hasn't done so for a while this time. This was the last weekly higher low, so maybe it's in search of another weekly higher low. That is to be seen. But at this point, I wouldn't say that this, even though this candle looks terrible, I don't think it has broken the structure yet. Or also, if I look at where the current price is in relation to the weekly moving averages. So the blue line is the weekly 20 EMA, the pink one is the weekly 50. You can see that it is still above the weekly moving averages. You can see that the moving averages are moving higher. So in that respect, it hasn't violated the moving average, meaning it's still above the moving averages. If it was below the moving averages somewhere right here, that would be negative, like we saw in 2022, that it had fallen below both the 20 and 50 EMA, and that was negative. But we're not there yet. Or also notice, if I look to the left again, when it was rallying after the COVID sell-off, it would pull back to where? The weekly 20 EMA, pull back to weekly 20 EMA. Here it undercut the weekly 20 and then rally, and then again weekly 20 EMA. So you can see that it has a history of pulling back to the weekly 20 EMA. So maybe it wants to do that again, maybe undercut it a little bit, but so we see that it is a history of it touching the weekly 20 EMA. It hasn't done so. Where's the weekly 20 EMA? It's around 178.59, maybe another 2-3 points below the current level, right? So that would be one area that I'll be looking out for. Also notice that on a weekly basis, when it was pulling back to the 20 EMA, the weekly RSI never fell below the 50 line. See, when this pullback happened, it remained above the weekly 50 level, RSI 50 level. Pullback, it came to the weekly 50. Pullback, it found support at the RSI 50 level. Here, pullback, it remained above. The only time it violated right here, it fell below 50 and remained below the 50 level for an extended period of time, and that's when we see this kind of weakness. So at the moment, if I look at the RSI was in an overbought level right here. Uh, and this pullback means that it's still above the 50 level. It hasn't broken the 50 level. So that's an important factor. And then MACD is still above the zero line. So when I look at the price action and the momentum indicators on a weekly basis, I am not seeing a breakdown at this point. This is not to say that it's not going to happen in the future, but when that happens, yes, I'm going to point that out. But at the moment, I'm seeing weakness on a daily basis, but not on a weekly basis. So that's that, I want to clarify that. So then the question is, what are some of the levels we should be looking out for? Well, as I said, one would be the weekly 20 EMA, which is around 178.50. Okay, if I look at the daily chart, I'm going to remove the moving averages. So another level I'm looking out for is this. It had traded between this zone right here, 186 on the downside and around 198 on the upside, and it has now broken below this level. So if you take this range and double it to the downside, you get to this level, which is around 174. So I'm looking at 174 as a possible target, which would basically push it slightly below the weekly 20 EMA, but which is fine because we've seen that it does do that. So those would be the level I'd be looking at, 174, 175. Also notice that Apple has a history of forming a base for several weeks. The volatility contracts, you can see for several weeks, the volatility contracts. So right now, after a big expansion in volatility, it's entirely possible we see the range compress quite a bit. And also notice that when it consolidates, it usually consolidates for maybe 5 or 6 weeks. If you look at right here, how many weekly candles do we see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 weekly candles of consolidation, and then moves higher. Here you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Few weeks of sideways action, move higher. You can see 5, 6 weeks of consolidation, move higher. So right now, all it has done is 1 week of drop. Maybe it can consolidate for a few weeks because there is an element of not just price but also of time that so it falls to a certain level and then it kind of forms a base and moves higher. So those are the sort of things I'm looking at. So 174, 175 on the downside. I just want to see what happens at that time. I want to see what happens on a weekly basis to RSI. So as long as RSI stays above 50, I would think that this weakness is temporary. But if RSI falls below 50 and hangs around there, then maybe we'll have to expect a bigger pullback. So that's basically how I'm looking at Apple. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. Obviously, I'm gonna post during market hours if I see anything interesting. So this is my Twitter page, so you can follow me. Next, let's look at Microsoft. So here's Microsoft. So let's get rid of the lines. So first of all, Microsoft is now down almost 11% so far from the top. This 11% is bigger than the previous correction. It's in line with this correction back in May. So that's that's something I wanted to point out first of all. If I look at Microsoft in relation to the moving averages, you can see it's below the daily 20 and 50. So obviously price action is weak. You can see it's making lower lows. Previously it was making higher highs, but that's not the case at the moment. If you look at the momentum indicators, RSI is moving lower. It's falling below the zero line. That's negative. RSI is below the 50 level on a daily basis. So both the price action momentum indicators are negative on a daily basis. So let's have a look at the weekly basis for Microsoft. So I'm just going to remove the moving averages for now. Now, if you look at the structure, you can see that since forming this low right here, I see series of weekly higher lows, right? This was the last higher low. It's entirely possible that it's in search of another weekly higher low. Maybe it wants to do something like this, and this would be the weekly higher low. So in terms of structure, I'm not seeing a breakdown in structure. if it was such that it had fallen to below this level, then it would be a break of the structure. We're not there yet. Or if it does something like this, let's say it pulls back and makes a lower high on a weekly basis, that would be concerning. But we don't have that yet. So at the moment, what I'm seeing is a pullback, and I am of the opinion that maybe this would be the weekly higher low, at least for now. That is to be seen, and that would be consistent with the previous weekly higher lows. Also, if I look at where price is in relation to the weekly moving averages, you can see that it's still above the weekly 20 EMA. Where's that weekly 20 EMA? It's around 318, right? Now, and does that respect the weekly 20 EMA? If I look to the left, after the COVID sell-off, you can clearly see that, this is the COVID sell-off, rally, weekly 20 EMA, weekly 20 EMA providing support, support. So it has a history of finding support at the weekly 20 EMA. So if that's the case, then let's just wait and see what happens at the weekly 20 EMA, which is around 318. And if I look at the RSI on a weekly basis, it was in overbought territory. It's now being coming off that level, but still remains above the weekly RSI 50 level. As long as the RSI remains above the 50 level, I wouldn't expect anything serious on the downside on a weekly basis. So that's basically my view. So what are some of the levels we should be looking at? Obviously, the weekly 20 EMA, which is around, as I said, 318. So if you look at on a daily basis, 318 basically, so 318 would basically bring us to around this level right here. Also, if you look at the on a daily basis, if you look at this range, so this is the range. If you take this range and you double it, that projects a target to this level. So this is around 318. So that's the level I'm watching to see if Microsoft holds. So just to summarize, I am seeing weakness on a daily basis. This weakness can continue for a little bit longer. But as long as I don't see a deterioration in price action and momentum indicators on a weekly basis, I would consider that weakness to be temporary and usually lasts for anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks. Because if you look at Microsoft right here, how many candles do you see? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 red candles, and then it starts to consolidate and move higher. If you look right here, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 week consolidation candles and then move higher. So, use a guide like this. Like, you have to allow consolidation for 4 to 6 weeks, and then move higher. So that's Microsoft. Let's have a look at NVIDIA next. Let's just hide this, NVIDIA. So again, NVIDIA too, very strong move. The 20 EMAs have been moving higher, but I'm seeing some weakness around this level, because previously you can see that it hadn't fallen below. So here was a short 1 day below the weekly 20, but I'm now beginning to see some consolidation under the weekly 20. And this is understandable, because after such a strong rally, you would have to expect people taking some profit. And you can also see on a daily basis the formation of a lower high, because it made from here to here higher high. So you can see that lower high is beginning to creep in. If you look at the momentum indicators, so the daily is not as bad as Microsoft and Apple. You can see that RSI is still above the 50 level, and although MACD is pulling back, but RSI hasn't fallen. You can see that RSI has remained above the 50 level for a very long period of time. It hasn't done so. Maybe it will do so going forward, but it hasn't done so. So what are the levels we should be looking out for if there is further weakness? So if I bring in the so the levels I'm looking at is obviously 440. 440 is this level, and then this level right here, which is 400. and above this we also have this the 50 EMA, which is around 415. So 415 and then 400, those would be the two levels I'm looking at. And on the upside, obviously this one, because this is now a lower high, so if it does something like this, then this becomes a double bottom. But on the other hand, if 440 gets breached, then these would be the two levels I'll be looking out for. If the overall market remains weak and falls, then definitely I would expect Nvidia to fall. But those would be the two levels I'd be looking at. And then we'll reassess what happens going forward. What about Tesla? So I'll just go through Tesla quickly. So you can see that Tesla has been consolidating, since reaching a high. It's been gradually moving lower. So this obviously looks a little bit weak at the moment. This is not unusual. All the big cap tech stocks, they've had a big run up. Now they're going through a consolidation. And this consolidation maybe is trying to establish a weekly higher low. You can see that right now it's trapped between the daily 20 and 50 EMA. If it breaks to the downside right here, before I get to that, let me just look at the momentum indicators on a daily basis. You can see RSI is now below 50, and you see MACD is beginning to move lower. If it crosses below the zero line, then obviously I would expect further weakness. RSI is already below 50, so the momentum indicators are weak. So is the price action. If you look at the weekly chart of Tesla, you can see that. So let's get rid of. So on a weekly basis, all I'm seeing is that since forming this low, this is a weekly higher low. Maybe this consolidation is looking to establish another weekly higher low. Maybe it wants to do something like this. Maybe it wants to pull back to this level. So even if it pulls back to this level right here on a weekly basis, the structure will still remain positive. Yeah, on a daily basis, that's going to look terrible. But on a weekly basis, the structure will still be fine. And if you look at the weekly moving averages, so the weekly moving averages are basically right around here at the same level. So if it pulls back to the weekly 20 and 50 EMA and retests this breakout level, on a weekly basis, everything should still be fine. And look at RSI. RSI is still above the 50. So I'm not seeing a breakdown either in price structure or momentum indicators on a weekly basis. But on a daily basis, obviously it's looking weak. And then if it breaks below the daily 50, it's gonna look weak, which is fine. As long as there is no deterioration on a weekly basis, any weakness in my view is temporary, and it would last for anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks. But once we start to see weakness on a weekly basis, that suggests that consolidation may last longer. We might have to expect a deeper pullback. So this level is around 215, 220. So that would be the level I would be looking out for, because once it breaks this, the 220 level is around right here. There's a bit of a gap here, so it's entirely possible that Tesla pulls back and retests those levels. So that's basically, and the other thing is that if the overall market pulls back, Tesla cannot go up. Tesla is gonna pull back too, because I am seeing weakness on a daily basis. It's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a little bit of time because it needs to deal with it needs to provide an opportunity for the weekly indicators to reset. And usually that takes, several weeks, 4 to 6 weeks or so. So that's Tesla. I'm going to leave it at that. I thank you very much for watching the video. Please consider subscribing, liking, all that good stuff. Thank you.